Since my father had left work only a few hours after the Winchell assassination, and over Uncle Monty's angry objections, driven back home to spend the remainder of that tense evening beside his wife and his children, the four of us were seated together at the kitchen table, waiting for the radio to bring fresh news, when Mr. Kakuza and Joey came up the back stairway to pay a visit. They knocked on the door, and then had to wait on the landing until my father was sure who was there. Mr. Kakuza was a bald, hulking man, 6.5 feet tall, weighing over 250 pounds, and he was dressed for work in his night watchman's uniform. A dark blue shirt, freshly pressed, dark blue trousers, and a wide black belt that, along with holding up his trousers, supported several pounds of the most extraordinary collection of equipment I'd ever been close enough to reach out and touch. There were keys in bunches, each the size of a hand grenade, hanging to the side of either pants pocket. There was a set of real handcuffs and a night watchman's clock in its black case, dangled by a strap from a polished belt buckle. At first glance, I took the clock for a bomb, but there was no mistaking for other than what it was, the pistol in the holster on his waist. A longish flashlight that had to have doubled as a blackjack was stuck, lamp upward, into his back pocket, and high on one sleeve of his starched work shirt was a triangular white patch whose blue lettering read Special Guard. Joey was also big, only 2 years my senior and already twice my weight, and to me the equipment he sported was nearly as intriguing as his father's. Looking like a wad of molded bubble gum plugging the hole of his right ear was a hearing aid attached by a thin wire to a round black case with a dial in the front that he wore clipped to his shirt pocket, another wire attached to a battery about the size of a large cigarette lighter that he carried around in his pants pocket. And in his hands he carried a cake, a gift from his mother to mine. Joey's gift was the cake. Mr. Kakuza's was a pistol. He owned two, one that he wore for work and the other that he kept hidden away at home. He'd come to offer my father the spare. "Nice of you," my father said to him, "but I really don't know how to shoot." "You pull the trig." Mr. Kakuza had a surprisingly soft voice for someone so enormous, though with a raspy edge to it, as if it had been exposed too long to the weather during his hours of walking the watchman's beat, and his accent was so enjoyable to hear that when I was alone, I sometimes pretended that the way he talked was the way I talked too. How many times did I entertain myself by saying, "You pull the trig"? With the exception of Joey's American-born mother, our Kakuzas all had oddish voices, the bewhiskered grandmother being oddest of all, odder even than Joey's, which sounded less like a voice than the uninflected echo of a voice, and odd not just because she went around speaking only Italian, whether to others, including me, or to herself while she swept the back stairway, or kneeled on the dirt planting her vegetables in our minute backyard, or just muttering in the dark doorway. Hers was the oddest because it sounded like a man's. She looked like a tiny old man in a long black dress, and she sounded like one too, particularly when barking the commands and decrees and injunctions that Joey never dared disobey. The playful half of him, the soul that the nuns and the priests never saw enough of to save, was virtually all that I ever encountered when we two were alone. Why it was hard to feel too sorry about his hearing was because Joey was himself a very jolly, prankish boy, with his own brand of hooting laughter, a talkative, curious, momentarily gullible boy whose mind moved quickly, if unpredictably. It was hard to feel sorry for him, yet when he was around his family, Joey's obedience was so painstakingly thorough that I found it almost as astonishing to contemplate as the painstakingly thorough lawlessness of a shushy Margolis. There couldn't have been a better son in all of Italian Newark, which was why my own mother soon found him irresistible. His faultless filial devotion and his long dark eyelashes, the way he imploringly looked at adults, waiting to be told what to do, allowing her to set aside the uneasy aloofishness that was her inbuilt defense against Gentiles. The old country grandmother, however, gave her and me the willies. "You am," Mr. Kakuza explained. Mr. Kakuza explained to my father, using a finger and thumb to demonstrate. And then you shoot, you aim, and then you shoot, and that's it. I don't need it, my father said. But if they come around, Mr. Kakuza said, how are you going to protect? Kakuza, I was born in the city of Newark in the year 1901, my father told him. All my life I have paid my rent on time, I have paid my taxes on time, I have paid my bills on time. I've never cheated on an employer for as much as a dime. I have never tried to cheat the United States government. I believe in this country. I love this country. Me too, said our massive new downstairs neighbor, whose wide black belt might have hung with shrunken heads given the enchantment that it continued to cast over me. I come here when I was a 10. Best country any place. No Mussolini here. I'm glad you feel that way, Kakuza. It's a tragedy for Italy. It's a human tragedy for people like you. Mussolini, Hitler, make me sick. You know what I love, Kakuza? Election day, my father told him. I love to vote. Since I was old enough, I have not missed an election. In 1924, I voted against Mr. Coolidge and for Mr. Davis, and Mr. Coolidge won. And we all know what Mr. Coolidge did for the poor people of this country. In 1928, I voted against Mr. Hoover for Mr. Smith, and Mr. Hoover won. And we all know what he did for the poor people of this country. In 1932, I voted against Mr. Hoover for the second time and Mr. Roosevelt for the first time. And thank God Mr. Roosevelt won, and he put America back on its feet. He took this country out of the Depression, and he gave the people what he promised, a New Deal. In 1936, I voted against Mr. Landon and for Mr. Roosevelt, and again Mr. Roosevelt won. 2 states, Maine and Vermont. That's all Mr. Landon is able to carry. Can't even carry Kansas. Mr. Roosevelt sweeps the country by the biggest presidential vote there has ever been. And once again, he keeps every promise to the working people that he made in that campaign. And so, what do the voters up and do in 1940? They elect a fascist instead. Not just an idiot like Coolidge. Not just a fool like Hoover, but an out-and-out fascist with a medal to prove it. They put in a fascist and a fascist rabble-rouser, Mr. Wheeler, as his sidekick, and they put Mr. Ford into the cabinet, not only an anti-Semite right up there with Hitler, but a slave driver who has turned the working man into a human machine. And so tonight, you come to me, sir, in my own home, and you offer me a pistol, in America in the year 1942. A brand new neighbor, a man I do not even know yet, has to come here and offer me a pistol in order for me to protect my family from Mr. Lindbergh's anti-Semitic mob. Well, don't you think I'm not grateful, Kakuza? I will never forget your concern, but I am a citizen of the United States of America, and so is my wife, and so are my children, and so, he said, his voice catching, and so is Mr. Walter Winchell. And now suddenly there was a radio bulletin about Walter Winchell. Shh, my father said, shh, as though in the kitchen, someone other than himself had been the orator holding forth. We all listen, even Joey appears to listen, the way birds flock to migrate and fish to swim in a school. The body of Walter Winchell, slain that day at a political rally in Louisville, Kentucky, by a suspected American Nazi Party assassin working in collaboration with the Ku Klux Klan, will be carried overnight by train from Louisville to Pennsylvania Station to Newark City. There, by order of Mayor Fiero LaGuardia, and under the protection of the New York City Police, the body will lie in state in the great hall of the train station throughout the morning, according to Jewish custom. A funeral service will be held that same day at 2 p.m. in Temple Emmanuel, New York's largest synagogue. A public address system will broadcast the proceedings beyond the temple to a gathering of mourners on Fifth Avenue, expected to number in the tens of thousands. Along with Mayor LaGuardia, speakers will include Democratic Senators James Meade, New York's Jewish Governor Herbert Lehman, and the former President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's happening, my father cries. He's back! FDR is back! We need him bad, Mr. Kakuza says. Boys, he asks, do you understand what is happening? And he throws his arms around Sandy and me. It's the beginning of the end of fascism in America. No Mussolini here, Kakuza. No more Mussolini here. And that is the end of chapter 7.